Chapter 19 of Pioneer Work in the Alps of New Zealand by Arthur Paul Harper. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Chapter 19 Glacier Observation. The number and area of the chief glaciers. Relation of neve to trunk. Are the glaciers advancing or retreating? Rates of motion. The Tasman compared with Franz Josef. The future of the Southern Alps. When it is considered that glacier exploration and observation have only been taken up seriously in New Zealand during the last few years, we have every reason to be pleased with the amount of information already collected, more especially as there have only been 2 or 3 persons devoting their attention to the subject, the majority having spent their time in climbing peaks only. I assume that a glacier which descends from a neve to a point below the line of perpetual snow is of the "first order." On this basis there are, within a radius of 17 miles from Mount Cook, or the central portion of the Southern Alps, 31 such glaciers, of which 25 are on the western and 6 on the eastern side of the dividing range. Note: ice streams of the first order, which are tributaries of larger glaciers, have been included with the main glacier as one. Of these, 20 are of a respectable size, 16 on the west and 4 on the east, while the remaining 11 are of minor importance, and only hanging glaciers sending a tongue of ice down a gully below the snow line. Though few in number, the glaciers on the eastern side of the Alps are larger than those on the west, with 2 exceptions, because the valleys are fewer but longer. It is the number of offshoots and valleys on the west, descending to sea level in so short a distance, that make that country so hard to explore. In speaking of the eastern glaciers within the above radius, I must rely on the figures given by Mr. T. N. Broderick. Note: New Zealand Alpine Journal, Volume 1, page 307, who has alone made any systematic observation on the 4 larger glaciers in the Tasman district, and who has most kindly placed his results at my disposal. All his work has been done with a theodolite, and therefore may be depended on as accurate. The following are his figures, showing the areas and dimensions of these ice fields. Name, Tasman. Area of glacier in acres, 13,664. Area on which the neve now lies, 25,000. Length, 18 miles 0 chains. Average width, 1 mile 15 chains. Greatest width, 2 miles 14 chains. Name, Murchison. Area of glacier in acres, 5,800. Area on which the neve now lies, 14,000. Length, 10 miles 70 chains. Average width, 0 miles 66.7 chains. Greatest width, 1 mile 5 chains. Name, Muller. Area of glacier in acres, 3,200. Area on which the neve now lies, 7,740. Length, 8 miles 0 chains. Average width, 0 miles 50 chains. Greatest width, 0 miles 61 chains. Name, Hooker. Area of glacier in acres, 2,416. Area on which the neve now lies, 4,112. Length, 7 miles 25 chains. Average width, 0 miles 41.3 chains. Greatest width, 0 miles 54 chains. Of the many glaciers in Westland, there are only 2 larger than the Muller and Hooker, namely the Fox and Franz Josef. There are several others, however, over 4 miles in length. As our work was only done with a prismatic compass, I cannot put the results forward as more than approximate, and have not attempted to ascertain the areas of supply and glacier ice. This being the case, I shall not commit myself by quoting more than a few figures and results. The length of the Fox Glacier is 9 3/4 miles, the Franz Josef 8 1/2 miles, the Balfour 6 miles, the McCarroll 5 miles, the Strauchan, La Perouse and Spencer 4 3/4 miles, and the Victoria Glacier 4 1/4 miles. The Douglas Glacier has a trunk of 3 miles 70 chains, and a neve running parallel to it of 3 miles 20 chains in length, and therefore the whole glacier would exceed in area some of the above, which have a greater length. The Horace Walker also, though only 3 miles 60 chains long, receives ice from a large neve for about 60 chains along its side, which would make it little less than the Spencer in area. It would be interesting to make some comparison between the relative proportions between neve and trunk in the case of perfect glaciers and disconnected glaciers. One would imagine that, given the same general altitude of surrounding ranges, the trunk of a disconnected glacier would be smaller in proportion to its neve than in the case of one perfectly formed. If we examine the proportions on various glaciers of neve to trunk, we find it impossible to advance any rule as to the relation between the two areas. The Douglas Glacier has a neve approximately 3 times the size of its trunk, which is a larger proportion than that of all the other chief glaciers, except the Franz Josef and Fox glaciers, which have neves approximately 5 and 3.5 times as large as their trunks. The supplies of the 4 glaciers in the Tasman district, based on the above table, are 1.8, 2.4, 2.4, and 1.7 times as large respectively as their trunks. The Douglas Glacier, therefore, shows an excess of neve, such as would be expected. But when the area of the Balfour Glacier is examined, we find that its trunk exceeds its neve, and is 3 times as large in area, approximately. Of course, in this instance, the precipitous nature of the surrounding ranges does not admit of a large snowfield. Why, therefore, does the trunk of the Balfour attain such a size? It is larger than that of the Douglas, also both are shut in by precipices, and covered with moraine. The Douglas has a peak from which to draw supplies, 1,100 feet lower than Mount Tasman, and probably has a smaller snowfield to depend on, but it has a large flat surface on which a large neve can find a resting place. Therefore, it has better opportunities than the Balfour of receiving sufficient supplies to enable a larger trunk to form in the valley. However, rapidity of descent in the valley bottom, and many other facts have to be considered before a satisfactory answer can be given to the various questions which occur to anyone seeing these 2 glaciers. Everything favours a larger trunk glacier in the Douglas than in the Balfour. It is higher above sea level, has a larger neve, and the relative positions of the 2 parts of the glacier are conducive to size. But in spite of these facts, we find that the Douglas, with a neve about 6 times as large as the Balfour, has a trunk only 2/3 the size. I have assumed that the neve is the portion of the glacier well covered with snow at the end of the summer, so that the trunk is practically limited to the "dry ice." Our observations on the glaciers are not of sufficient age yet to determine to what extent they are advancing or retreating. In the Tasman district reliable traverses, which can be replotted at any time, were made by Mr. Brodrick of the terminal faces of the Tasman Glacier in November 1890 and the Muller Glacier in March 1889 and November 1890. This is all that has been done to determine advance or retreat, and no other observations have been made to compare the present positions of the terminals, nor can I ascertain that any cairns to estimate side shrinkage have been erected. Considering the number of climbers who have, during the last 3 years, been in this district, it is a pity that a day or 2 was not spared from the rush after new ascents, for the purpose of putting up a few permanent marks. Personally, I have only been in this locality during the few days mentioned with Fitzgerald, since 1892, but as far as I could estimate, there appeared to be a distinct advance on one side of the terminal face of the Tasman Glacier. Owing, however, to the necessity of immediate return to my work on the west coast, I had no time to make closer examination, nor erect cairns. The Hooker River interferes to such an extent with the terminal of the Muller Glacier that it will never be easy to determine whether alterations are due to retreat or not. In the absence of fixed marks, and owing to the shortness of time since observations were commenced, it can only be said generally that to all appearances no change is taking place in any of the 4 large glaciers. Owing to the terminal faces of the Fox and Franz Josef being so easy to reach, and being in a district overrun by diggers, we can to some extent estimate the change from hearsay or old photographs, and further retreat or otherwise can be measured from the cairns and marks which I have left in these 2 valleys. The Franz Josef was, about the year 1867, according to an old photograph of the terminal face taken by Mr. Pringle, far in advance of its present position. The ice pushed its way (see the map in Chapter 11) against the Forges Moutonnées, and it was possible, so I hear from a digger, to touch it when on the top of the Sentinel Rock. The Park and Harper rocks were covered, and apparently the Muller and Strauchan were half enveloped by the ice. I estimate that the glacier at that date was 80 or 100 yards further in advance, and 10 yards wider on the east bank, on the average, than in September 1894. There is evidence of this retreat on the rocky banks of the glacier on the east side, both at the terminal face and further up the valley. The rocks for some yards ahead of the ice, and for some feet above its present position, exhibit clean, newly rubbed surfaces of a lighter colour than the rocks above. This at first misled me to expect a large winter advance, but it evidently testifies to a recent retreat all along the line. The positions of the cairns, which I have made for future reference, can be seen in Appendix Note 7. The Fox Glacier, as already stated, is moraine covered at the terminal face for a few chains back, and therefore the changes would not be so rapid. It is narrow and uninteresting at this point. During our visit in 1894, our scientific ardour was damped by excessive rain, and when I was alone on the glacier, my unlucky mishaps prevented extra work. We have therefore only 2 marks. Note. See Appendix Note 7. End of note. At the terminal face for future reference. The moraine-covered ice here enabled many diggers to cross the river on the glacier, and we may gather to some extent the position of the snout in 1894 as compared with that of 25 years earlier. From these accounts I estimate that no change has taken place, a conclusion borne out by the fact that there are here no such marks of recently dressed surfaces of rock like that noticed on the Franz Josef. At the terminal face there is a low dead moraine with some scrub growing on it, and the ice practically touches that now as it did 25 years ago. The surface moraine is evidently of great age, for there are several pieces of vegetation on it, some little distance from the actual snout. From hearsay evidence again, it is clear that some 20 years ago the Spencer Glacier in the Callery Valley descended into the river, the water washing against a face of ice, so the diggers say. In 1893, though not close enough to measure its exact distance from the river, I could see that it was at least a chain away. Thus, retreating seems to be going on here, while from all accounts the Burton has not altered its position. In summing up the results of my personal observation on these glaciers, it seems that while the Hooker, Muller, Burton, and Fox glaciers have undergone no change during the periods in which they have been known to us, the Spencer and Franz Josef are retreating, and the Tasman to a slight degree advancing. On the other chief glaciers, the McKerrow, Marchant, Horace Walker, Balfour, Strauchan, Fettes, Douglas, Victoria, and Murchison, I could see no marked signs of recent change of position. The conclusion, therefore, if we may presume to draw one after such short knowledge, seems to be that at present the New Zealand glaciers are not receding to any appreciable extent. On the subject of glacier motion, we have some interesting figures, those of Mr. Brodrick on the 4 glaciers of the Tasman district, and those of Douglas and myself on the Franz Josef. As Mr. Brodrick has been kind enough to place his at my disposal, I shall quote them in toto. Tasman Glacier, Line 1 near the Ball Glacier, rods set on the 5th of December 1890 and reset on the 7th January 1891. Station 1, total movement 27.2 feet, average daily rate 9.9 inches. Station 2, total movement 41 feet, average daily rate 14.9 inches. Station 3, total movement 47.7 feet, average daily rate 17.3 inches. Station 4, total movement 48.4 feet, average daily rate 17.6 inches. Station 5, total movement 49.6 feet, average daily rate 18 inches. Station 6, total movement 46.9 feet, average daily rate 17 inches. Station 7, total movement 44.2 feet, average daily rate 16.1 inches. Station 8, total movement 38.3 feet, average daily rate 13.9 inches. Line 2 ranged from point of the Maltebrunn Spur, first set December 5th, 1890 and reset 7th January 1891. Station 2, total movement 6.5 feet. Daily rate, 2.4 inches. Station 3, total movement, 25.9 feet. Daily rate, 9.4 inches. Station 4, total movement, 28.7 feet. Daily rate, 10.4 inches. Station 5, total movement, 32.7 feet. Daily rate, 11.8 inches. Station 6, total movement, 36.6 feet. Daily rate, 13.3 inches. Station 7, total movement, 33.7 feet. Daily rate, 12.2 inches. Station 8, total movement, 34.4 feet. Daily rate, 12.5 inches. Station 9, total movement, 29 feet. Daily rate, 10.5 inches. Station 10, total movement, 25.4 feet. Daily rate, 9.2 inches. Station 11, total movement, 13.9 feet. Daily rate, 5 inches. Murchison. Line ranged from point above Dixon Glacier, set on December 29th, 1890, reset 48 hours later. Station 78, total movement, 1 inch. Daily rate, 0.5 inches. Station 79, total movement, 7 inches. Daily rate, 3.5 inches. Station 80, total movement, 1 foot 4 inches. Daily rate, 8 inches. Station 81, total movement, 1 foot 5½ inches. Daily rate, 8.7 inches. Station 82, total movement, 1 foot 2 inches. Daily rate, 7 inches. Station 83, total movement, 9 inches. Daily rate, 4.5 inches. Station 92, total movement, 9.2 inches. Daily rate, 4.6 inches. Station 93, total movement, 5.2 inches. Daily rate, 2.6 inches. Hooker. Line ranged at a point 3/4 mile from the terminal face, set at noon on April 4th, 1889 and reset April 7th, 1889 at 8 a.m. Station 1, total movement 3.3 inches, daily rate 1.1 inches. Station 2, total movement 8.2 inches, daily rate 2.9 inches. Station 3, total movement 12 inches, daily rate 4.2 inches. Station 4, 15.4 inches, daily rate 5.4 inches. Station 5, total movement 12.8 inches, daily rate 4.5 inches. Muller. Various marked stones first observed on the 29th March 1889 and again on the 14th November 1890 and 3rd December 1893. Station 1, 1889 to 1890, total movement 239.3 feet, daily rate 4.8 inches. 1890 to 1893, total movement 392.7 feet, daily rate 4.2 inches. Station 2, 1889 to 1890, total movement 271.7, daily rate 5.5 inches. 1890 to 1893, total movement 371.4 feet, daily rate 4.1 inches. Station 3, 1890 to 1893, total movement 406.3 feet, daily rate 4.4 inches. Station 4, total movement 262.6 feet, daily rate 5.3 inches. 1890 to 1893, total movement 424.8 feet, daily rate 4.5 inches. Station 5, 1889 to 1890, total movement 359.6 feet, daily rate 7.3 inches. 1890 to 1893, total movement 436.4 feet, daily rate 4.7 inches. Station 6, 1889 to 1890, total movement 398 feet, daily rate 8 inches. Station 7, 1889 to 1890, total movement 611 feet, daily rate 12.3 inches. Station 8, 1889 to 1890, total movement 506 feet, daily rate 10.2 inches. 1890 to 1893. Total movement 889.2 feet. Daily rate 9.6 inches. Station 9, 1889 to 1890. Total movement 409 inches. Daily rate 8.2 inches. Total movement 409 feet. Daily rate 8.2 inches. 1890 to 1893. Total movement 557.5 feet. Daily rate 6.2 inches. Station 10, 1889 to 1890. Total movement 388.1 feet. Daily rate 7.1 inches. Station 11, 1889 to 1890. Total movement 146.1 feet. Daily rate 2.9 inches. On the Tasman, Murchison and Hooker, rods were carefully set and reset in lines across the glaciers. The instrument used was a 5-inch theodolite. Quote, "A different method was adopted on the Muller, in order to show the direction as well as the velocity. 4 trigonometrical stations were placed on the huge lateral moraines near the lower end of the glacier, and they were then used as basis for determining trigonometrically the positions of the stones on the ice. Each stone had a number painted on it, and every care taken in observing. The great steadiness of the ice motion is a noticeable feature. The stones have retained the same upright positions for nearly 5 years, and the rods supported on them by piles of stones in 1889 were found there in 1893." End quote. The original positions of the stones on the Muller Glacier must be stated, in order to draw any conclusions from their rate of motion. Number 1 is in the centre of the glacier, 63 chains from the terminal. Number 2 is in the centre of the glacier, 53 chains from the terminal. Number 3 is in the centre of the glacier, 61 chains from the terminal. Number 4 is in the centre of the glacier, 77 chains from the terminal. Number 5 is in the centre of the glacier, 89 chains from the terminal. Number 6 is in the centre of the glacier, 107 chains from the terminal. Number 7 is in the centre of the glacier, 122 chains from the terminal. Number 8 is in the centre of the glacier, 145 chains from the terminal. Number 9 is 10 chains from the south side and 122 chains from the terminal. Number 10 is 2 chains from the south side and 111 chains from the terminal. Number 11 is 11 chains from the south side and 48 chains from the terminal. From these figures, we see that the rate of motion is not constant, for the stones had not travelled so far towards the terminal face as to account for the decreased motion in 1893. It is also evident that the winter flow must be very sluggish, for the Muller Glacier has a greater fall per mile than the Tasman, and therefore at least as great a rate of motion would be expected. It is evident that the lower average rate is due to the observations extending over winter as well as summer. All the other measurements record summer motion only. The only glacier measured on the west coast is the Franz Josef, the motion of which Douglas and I endeavoured to estimate in 1893. I put forward our results with some misgivings, for they are very startling. We placed a row of stakes along the ice, and reset the line again after the intervals mentioned in the table below. But though every care was used, the results can only be quoted as approximate, for a prismatic compass is not sufficiently accurate, and may be responsible for a considerable error in such observations. The figures, however, are just as likely to be under as over the mark, for it is impossible to say on which side the error would be. When it is considered that we could see with the naked eye the change in position of a mark on the ice after an interval of 24 hours, it is evident that the daily summer motion is very considerable. The side motion in the following table is accurate, for we had marks on ice and rock to check our results. Franz Josef. Line 1, Station 1, 7 days. Total movement 35 inches. Daily rate 5 inches. Direction magnetic 320. Remarks 15 yards from north side. Line 1, Station 2, 20 days. Total movement 600 inches. Daily rate 30 inches. Direction magnetic 335.3. Remarks about 5 chains north side. Line 1, Station 3, 4 days. 531 inches total movement. daily rate 132.75, direction magnetic 300. Line 1, Station 4, 4 days, total movement 408 inches, daily rate 102 inches, direction magnetic 352. Line 1, Station 5, 4 days, total movement 212 inches, daily rate 53 inches, direction magnetic 314. Line 1, Station 6, no return. Line 2, Station 1, 3 days, total movement 460 inches, daily rate 153.3 inches, direction magnetic 286. Remarks: 8 chains from north side. Line 2, Station 2, 3 days, total movement 474 inches, daily rate 158 inches, direction magnetic 308. Line 2, Station 3, 3 days, total movement 600 inches, daily rate 209 inches, direction magnetic 285.3. Line 2, Station 4, number of days 3, total movement 621, daily rate 207, direction magnetic 260.3. Line 2, Station 5, 3 days, crevasse opened, peg lost. Line 2, Station 6, 3 days, total movement 71 inches, daily rate 23.6 inches, direction magnetic 242.3. Remarks: 6 chains from the south side. Station, side motion by Arch Creek, 7 days, total movement 57 inches, daily rate 7.28 inches, direction magnetic 335. Remarks: 8 feet from north side. Line 1 was just above a small icefall, 90 chains from the terminal face, and was set on the 22nd November 1893. Line 2 was above another steep fall in the glacier, and at the foot of the great icefall, 190 chains from the terminal face. Peg number 6 shows that the motion is considerably checked by Cape Defiance, and that the ice is taking a direction towards Harper's Creek. The very rotten nature of the ice at the margin of the glacier prevented a nearer approach to either bank here. This line was set on November 23rd, 1893. The last station, by Arch Creek, was set on November 13th, 1893, and checked by marks on the rocks. It was 43 chains from the terminal face. The above tables fully bear out the fact that a glacier moves faster in the centre than at the sides, and also that the rate of motion decreases as the terminal face is approached. The actual influence of the tributary streams of ice on the motion of the main glacier cannot be decided from our observations. It would be interesting to set on foot a system of measurements from which to arrive at some comparison between the rate of flow of tributaries and that of the main glacier, and if possible follow the movement of the ice of the various streams after they have joined forces. For I presume that, though to all appearances these streams unite, yet they do not mingle, nor do they lose their individuality altogether. If this is true, it would add to our general knowledge on the subject to try and follow the individual streams after they meet. To draw satisfactory conclusions with regard to the rapidity with which a glacier flows at different angles of descent would be impossible from the above tables. Before any law can be laid down on the subject, much more complete measurements are necessary. The lines of pegs would have to be arranged at relative distances from the respective terminals. In the tables quoted, the rates of motion have been taken promiscuously, and only in 2 instances do the lines lie at all in similar positions as regards the terminal face. Reducing each glacier to 100 chains in length, we find by reducing the other figures that the lines of measurement were placed as follows: Tasman Line 1, 36.1 chains from terminal; Tasman Line 2, 26.3 chains from terminal; Hooker, 10.2 chains from terminal; Franz Josef Line 1, 13 chains from terminal; Franz Josef Line 2, 27.5 chains from terminal. This gives us 2 cases in which the rates of motion can be in any degree compared, namely, Line 2 on the Tasman and Line 2 on the Franz Josef. Assuming that the figures returned for the latter glacier are correct, we find that its maximum rate is rather more than 14 times as great as that of the former. This is a very startling difference until we examine the respective falls per mile of these two ice streams, which are as follows. Tasman, total fall 313.3 feet per mile. From neve to terminal, 187.7 feet per mile. Franz Josef, total fall 941.1 feet per mile. From neve to terminal, 1,064 feet per mile. The latter glacier, therefore, has 3 times as great a total fall and nearly 6 times as great a fall per mile below the neve as the former. A series of careful observations, which would give us the motion of the tributary streams and their influence in retarding or helping the flow of the whole mass, together with systematic measurements in similar relative positions, combined with the average fall per mile, should give us considerable help in deciding the laws relating to glacier motion, the effect of obstructions in the valleys, and various other results which we cannot compute from our present observations. I have, in the case of the Tasman and Franz Josef, merely set down the particulars, for they are the only two that can be compared from observations already taken. Someone may, perhaps, be able to draw satisfactory conclusions from the figures, which I fear I am unable to do. All these points of scientific interest can be determined in Europe with as great exactness as in the New Zealand Alps. But the great attraction of the latter is, that besides being able to make satisfactory observations, the observer has the pleasure of several virgin peaks to ascend, and also can observe the effects of a low snow and ice line in a warm climate. There is far greater activity in the Southern Alps than in the European, and therefore the effects of snow and ice are more marked and much more easily recorded. The avalanches are more frequent, falling night and day, than in Europe. The glaciers descend to a lower level, and the country is more shattered. Consequently, the action of snow and ice in altering the conformation of the country is going on to a greater and more noticeable extent. I do not know the Caucasus, but am well acquainted with Switzerland, and know Norway more or less. My comparison, therefore, only applies to the two latter countries. To a traveller seeking fine scenery, the Southern Alps, especially the western side, offers a splendid field. I used to say that, below the snow line, New Zealand could not be compared with Switzerland. That was before I had been into the then unknown western ranges. I now say without hesitation that the Southern Alps can not only be compared to, but in many cases exceed in grandeur, the scenery of Switzerland. The only thing lacking is the presence of human interest, for there are no picturesque peasants and chalets to give an added charm to the wild and glorious scenes met with at every turn. I often picture to myself a flood of tourists overrunning New Zealand, as they overrun Switzerland and Norway, and imagine future developments resulting from such an influx. We should see perhaps a fine hotel or two on Welcome Flat, others on Castle's Flat or at the head of the Twain, all of which localities far surpass many popular resorts in Europe in their attractions. However, may the day be far distant when hotels shall spring up like mushrooms in the glorious valleys of Westland, and the crack of the whip and clatter of wheels of Cobb & Co.'s Royal Mail coaches disturb their solitudes, and awake protesting echoes from their awe-inspiring cliffs and precipices. I do not wish these glories of nature to be hidden from travellers. Far from it, but should like to see a far-seeing government constructing a few horse tracks and huts in some localities, which Douglas or I can mention. A few £100 a year less spent on experimental legislation would enable such tracks to be gradually made, and the localities thus rendered accessible would attract travellers who would benefit the colony far more than Acts of Parliament. Travellers, however, must not expect to view magnificent scenery without some trouble and a little discomfort in a young colony. But for all that, they should not be debarred from seeing the finest sights for want of a few tracks. If the foregoing pages induce any persons to make an attempt to visit the Southern Alps for pleasure, or in pursuit of science or adventure, and if they cause the authorities to value properly one of the finest assets in the wealth of the country, I shall feel that my work has produced some tangible result. End of chapter 19.